Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hey everyone, and welcome to Raising Parents, the Parenting Science Insights podcast, produced by Ella Massal, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Dina Sargent. Let's get started.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the show. I am Marie, filling in for Dina while she's away on a personal matter. Today we're aiming to break the stigma of postpartum health for diverse bodies. We'll be discussing everything from postpartum health as a concept to societal expectations and biases, as well as what we can do as a society to move forward and do better. And to guide us through this is Dr. Iris Lesser, an assistant professor at the School of Kinesiology at the University of the Fraser Valley. But that aside, she's also a certified exercise physiologist. Her research centers around finding innovative ways for diverse populations to be physically active across the lifespan. Hi, Iris. How are you going today?
Hi, Marie. I'm doing well. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Could you tell us a bit about how your interest in postpartum research got sparked?
Well, for me, it was definitely a personal story. So having my first child here in Canada and feeling like that transition from being pregnant into postpartum was a really challenging one that was really focused on the well-being of the child, which was, of course, important in itself, but really didn't take account for what the mother would have been through, both physiologically and physically going through labor and delivery, but also mentally and emotionally with now moving through this new trajectory and phase of parenthood. And so I really did feel like after that experience, I wanted to do something in my field that could sort of change the narrative around how we engage with mothers in the postpartum phase. And being someone who studies and focuses on physical activity, it really became a conversation around, well, how can we make this movement, this physical activity, a better piece of healthcare and supporting women after the birth of a child? So it definitely started out personally. And then, over time, we're learning more and more from other mothers of what sort of questions we need to keep asking and how to really change the conversation.
That's amazing. And your research sounds like it comes from such a heartfelt story and experience. And it's also a great preface for our topic for the day. But before we get started, I'd love to get to know you better. This is Have You Met Iris? My first question for you is, what is your favorite book?
So I'm going to go with Where the Crawdads Sing for this one. Mm-hmm. This is also where I grabbed my second daughter's name, though I don't think I really realized that till I watched the movie. And then I was like, oh, that's where that name came from. I just knew I liked it. But I quite enjoyed that book.
I have that same experience with movies and TV shows. Sometimes I just there's this name that rings through your head and you just really like it and you forget where it even came from until you revisit that. So I totally agree with you there. And that's adorable. So what movie have you been watching recently?
So this one's a little bit easier. I mean, I have to be honest, I don't do a lot of movie watching these days. It usually takes me 5 days to get through one movie.
Yeah.
But I happen to have recently actually sat down and watched an entire movie before somebody woke up.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It was a big feat.
Yeah.
But it's called Naiad, and it's about the first woman who went and attempted to do this ultra marathon swim in her 60s to really prove that she could do it. And it was this distance that nobody else had ever done before. And it was just this really amazing feat of women's health and ageism and physical activity, and just seeing somebody really do something so inspiring. It's a good one.
Yeah, when movies hit all of those right spots, from inspiring to all of these topics of ageism or anything like that. It's very gratifying to watch. So that sounds really nice. And are you listening to any podcasts at the moment?
I've been trying this one called The Maintenance Phase, very in line with the topic here. It's really looking at a lot of the obesity bias, but from a scientific perspective. So instead of just kind of broadly saying, well, we don't want obesity bias because it makes us feel poorly about ourselves, but actually, breaking down the original science that created that bias and how often there was no science backing or it was misinterpreted. So it's a really good one for anyone to listen to who maybe falls anywhere on that spectrum of either, challenge with body weight themselves or really not able to reflect on the bias they may have and kind of seeing the two different sides that actually, there isn't always anything backing this. We've just decided it's correct.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. And I've always wondered where these biases came from. So this might be one that I'd have to check out myself. Do you have a role model either in your professional life or personal life?
There's one I use a lot in my teaching. So I teach a clinical exercise therapy course, and one of the topics we cover is, obesity and obesity bias. And I always play for them a video by Myrna Valerio, and she is again a distance runner, an ultra marathoner who lives in a bigger body, and she's very vocal about her experience of being someone who is larger and engaging in these ultra marathons where she often finishes last or isn't taken seriously. And she's written a book, and she's just a really, really great reference, I think, for people to look at and be able to disconnect sort of what does physical activity and fitness always look like.
What are the qualities of hers that inspire you?
Well, she's certainly more open about her experience than I think most of us could ever feel comfortable being able to reflect on the fact that, this is my body size and this is the way I look despite fitting into this athletic narrative, and being okay with having that discussion about being known as fit and fat and being able to be open about that conversation. That's not an easy thing for most people to be able to do.
For sure. And it's one thing to be introspective about it and to have accepted it on your own, but it's a completely different thing to also be vulnerable with it with plenty of other people. It takes a lot of courage to do that. So I can see why you look up to her so much. And thank you so much for answering all of my questions. I feel like we got to know you a bit better. Now we're moving on to the interview section. And my first question for you is, what do you think parenting is? What is your definition of parenting, as it can differ from person to person? So we'd love to hear your thoughts.
I think that's probably one of the most challenging questions I've ever been asked.
Starting out strong. Yeah.
The difference between what you think parenting is when you're pregnant and you've never been a parent and you sort of are just viewing people around you and their experiences versus what it is imminently with an infant, and then what it is as that infant becomes a toddler and a preschooler and a school-age child, which is as far as I've gotten. It has changed so much. I think in and out of it all, I could say it's both a push and a pull. Like I'm constantly pushed and challenged really to the brink of my capacity, and often maybe beyond my capacity, but you're constantly pulled back in to wanting to try again, to, loving your children regardless of the challenges. And, at the end of the day, like really wanting your children to be people that are good, that are inherently kind, will do good in the world. And so it's worth a lot of that strife as you kind of try to navigate the outcome, which is really to make good people. And there's days where they don't always feel like good people, but it's all, an act of progress.
And with that in mind, what do you think expectant parents need to be aware of when transitioning into parenthood?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is recognizing how incredibly individual it is. I mean, between just different babies and personalities and easier children and more challenging children, just from the standpoint of taking care of them, the difference between having kids that are poor sleepers versus kids that sleep better. I mean, all of these things play into whether you feel like you are navigating parenting. And I think the thing that really destroys us all is the social comparison, is, looking at someone else and thinking they're doing it better, they're doing it easier, they look better doing it, and constantly playing that game of, well, you must be a better parent than me because your baby's already sleeping, because you potty trained earlier, because, something in your eyes is an act of achievement that you haven't achieved. But all kids are different.
Yeah.
And all parents and their capacity is different. And I mean, the difference between having grandparents around and social support versus, doing it more inherently on your own, I mean, that's massive in itself. Yeah. So 100% don't compare, live your life, be the parent you want to be, and, just try to feel good about that, to recognize what a hard task you are doing day in, day out.
Absolutely. And how many kids do you have?
Well, I have 2 going on 20.
Oh,
I have
wow.
2.
2 going on 20. So how different were your experiences with both of them?
Oh, sorry, I was joking. I meant I have 2, but it feels like I have 20.
Oh, 2 going on 20. I thought you had 2 kids going on 20. But yeah, are there big differences in the 2 of them?
Yes. Mine are 3 and 7, and they are extremely different children. And that means that the challenges you have with each one are different. And I mean, talk about comparison. There's another place where you can't play that game is, well, you're just so much easier than your sister, or, why does this have to be so much harder with you? Because we're all different people and we all have different struggles. And yeah, you're not the same, nor should you be. And so, yes, I can certainly see how, and I know people who have 4 or 5 kids and they'll say every single one of them was completely different. And there truly were easier babies who slept and babies who, like mine, aren't sleeping up till grade school. And that's, it's just luck of the draw. It's not something you're doing.
Definitely. Yeah. I know my mom always said that I was the easiest kid growing up because I slept all the time and I didn't do anything else. Which in hindsight, that's a bit concerning, but that's okay. I'll settle for being the easiest child. But back to the topic, could you provide us an overview of postpartum well-being? What are some of the key emotional, physical, and psychological aspects that new mothers commonly experience during this phase?
I mean, I think you kind of have to start with what is postpartum. I mean, originally that sort of medical definition of postpartum, at least in Canada, really extended that first 6 weeks after giving birth to a child. And it was considered to be the most intensive physical change where you're recovering from birth, where you're seeing blood volume changes, the uterus shrinking back down, a lot of that recovery from birth starting to have things return to normal. And you're also looking at often the start of lactation. And so whether or not breastfeeding is going well. But if we look at sort of the broader timeline of what postpartum is, which some people say, up to 1 year, that first year of your child's life. And some people say postpartum is from the moment you've given birth for the rest of your life, because you never are fully who you were prior. And, psychologically, emotionally, there's things that you're going to struggle with, that you're going to be working around for many years that extend beyond just those immediate hormonal changes. And we really have to be able to assist women broadly in being able to return through that postpartum period to feeling well. So, for some people, it's not till 2 years postpartum that they recognize, hey, I really don't think I'd ever really felt okay again. And actually, they had postpartum depression that was never diagnosed because within that midst of sleep deprivation, you're just like, well, this is how you feel now. And so I think we have to be really cautious about making assumptions of like, we're only dealing with postpartum health in the first 6 weeks postpartum, because it's a much longer extension than that and can affect really, a woman's lifespan or her next pregnancy if she's having more children.
Mm-hmm. And how does the concept of postpartum health differ for individuals with diverse bodies, and what are some unique challenges that they might face during this period?
So, physiologically, very little. The recovery, whether it's a vaginal birth or a C-section birth, is going to take time for anyone. I think when you start looking at more of this emotional or psychosocial lens, where we might see a discrepancy in this period of time is contextually in how individuals are either feeling within their body or how other people are making them feel with their body. So, you might have heard, conversations about someone who either looks like they've returned to their pre-pregnancy size, so this sort of bounce back narrative, versus when somebody has always been larger and they get pregnant and they continue to be larger and then they give birth, and lo and behold, just getting rid of that baby doesn't mean that your body just, miraculously return to something it never was. And so in this case, you've got this additional mental well-being challenge of really people having this expectation that you would now look different, even though prior to pregnancy, this is what you looked like. And I think, when it comes to breastfeeding, and we've become a lot more comfortable with nursing in public, with letting, women have ownership over their bodies and feel comfortable doing these things in public. And when you have a newborn baby, you're doing that often. So if you're talking about leaving the house, you're typically talking about nursing in public. That's a lot more challenging for someone who isn't comfortable with their body or who feels like they're judged for that body.
Yeah, for sure. I can imagine myself. I wouldn't say that like I'm petite, or like I'm probably about average to like a bit larger than average, and I can't even like bring myself to wear anything that's like sleeveless. So I can't imagine how women going through that can feel comfortable nursing in public. That's got to take a lot. But what are some of the common misconceptions that people have surrounding postpartum health? And is there a way that we can challenge any of this stereotype or misconception surrounding it?
I think broadly, this just assumption that you have a baby and your body will look anything like it did 10 months ago is really where the whole disconnection starts.
Yeah.
There are certainly women who, I'll use the classic term, bounce back quickly, who, are probably women who have always found it a little bit easier to lose weight or have never really had weight to be a challenge in their lives. And so it does, just seem to disappear a little bit quicker. But we also know that that's not common, that when we look at, data on weight retention, or what we call postpartum weight retention, it's extremely common that you are going to be a bit heavier than you were before having a child. And, that kind of makes sense. Your body is different now. You've, given birth to a child, and that leaves scars, both literally and physically. And, I think we all need to realize that movement or physical activity is part of well-being and is part of living well and being able to move with our children. But that physical activity doesn't mean exercise. It doesn't mean a boot camp. It doesn't mean stressing a body that's not ready for movement, because you think, if I don't do this now, I'm going to be judged. I'm going to look like this forever. I'm not fitting the narrative. You're essentially just going to create this kind of ongoing spiral for people who have a larger body size, where they feel guilty for postpartum weight retention, and that leads to a deficit in psychosocial well-being and activity avoidance. So it's all this very negative spiral.
Yeah. And how do you think the media and pop culture has contributed to this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you're following anything about Ozempic and sort of the
Oh, I
what's
have.
happening
Well,
on
like not
social media.
closely, but I have heard about Ozempic and what that is all about. But could you, just for the audience, could you give us a brief explanation about what that is and what's going on there?
So Ozempic has always been a medication for diabetes, for type 2 diabetes, to control blood glucose levels. But in some of these experiments that they've done, these randomized trials with Ozempic, they noted that people were losing a pretty robust amount of weight. And given sort of the fixation we've had in society for a long time about finding this sort of miraculous weight loss drug, it was really touted as like, here is the answer to the obesity epidemic is, we have Ozempic. And the narrative that sort of came out in social media was really not about health and understanding that for some people, they have tried everything and their body weight is a challenge for their health. And a medication like this, it's, life-saving or improves quality of life like any disease, but instead being bought by celebrities, by people who just kind of wanted to lose the last 10 pounds and really not caring about the caution behind medication usage. And it really changed the conversation away from being about health to being about just wanting to look a certain way. Because, I saw a blog by a physician who considered herself to be quite weight neutral and treat patients with this neutrality. So if your obesity or your body weight is not impairing your health, then it's not a conversation we're having at the doctor's office. But now she had patients coming in saying, you know what, I'm tired of being judged. I'm tired of being biased. I'm tired of living in this body. I want Ozempic. And I mean, talk about the perfect storm of a narrative to say, you want to say that we don't care about larger bodies. Well, why would we then medically alter them?
Yeah. It's also just kind of taking, I'm not sure if this is too harsh of a way of putting it, but it's kind of taking the resources away from people who actually need that. Because what I've heard that is that Ozempic is now very, very high in demand, low in supply because of this phenomenon that's been going on. So what do you think that education and awareness initiatives can play a part in breaking that down? What do you think needs to be done there, if so?
I mean, I think imagery diversity is really important. One of the areas that I'm hoping to do some more work in is when we're providing physical activity postpartum and saying, these are different types of activities that you could engage in 6 weeks postpartum, 10 weeks postpartum, et cetera, that we're not referring them to someone who looks like they've never had a baby. That we're showing real imagery of what bodies look like and what they look like throughout the postpartum experience, so that we're not forced into this comparison, so that we're not attempting to re-engage in physical activity, but following a yoga program taught by someone who's a size 2, who we really can't have this commonality with or relatability. So I think that's kind of where it needs to begin, like the representation of what we're relating to. And, we sort of started that conversation about the challenge of comparison in parenting. Well, there's also the challenge of comparison in body diversity, because you could be doing just as much physical activity and eating just as well as that person. But now you're making this comparison of, I'm not good enough. I'm not enough.
Completely. And from there, what do you think we can do as a society to challenge the existing social norms and cultural standards that perpetuate all this stigmatization and discrimination against new parents with diverse bodies?
Well, I mean, there's certainly some change that needs to happen within the medical community. A lot of the stories you do hear through pregnancy and postpartum is that healthcare professionals are sort of feeding into this narrative of focusing on body weight. And there's some real challenges to this because, during pregnancy, it's the time where you're expected to gain weight and where, providers do need to keep an eye on weight gain. But then postpartum, there's no real conversation about what is normal or what does it look like or how quickly should we expect weight to change. And so we really aren't able to connect those two. Like, how do you go from pregnancy and weight gain, which is really scary for a lot of women, like who know they struggle with body weight and know they're going to gain this weight and then they're going to have to lose it. And we're just kind of feeding them through and saying, okay, now the baby's out. How are we going to get back to that lower body weight? And we really don't have enough knowledge out there to even say what is normal or what do we typically see or what's maybe even changed as we have moms having kids a little bit older. And so weight change is also going to be more challenging than when you're 20.
Yeah, for sure. And so what are some practical strategies or resources that individuals going through this can use in order to prioritize their postpartum health and well-being while navigating through all of this social pressure and expectation?
Well, we tout a lot just the narrative of self-compassion in our physical activity research. I mean, self-compassion is a pretty simplistic term, being kind to oneself. But it can mean so much in those deep postpartum moments when you're navigating sleep deprivation, feeling like you're in a body that's no longer yours, of really not feeling like you can manage movement, to recognize that, there are days that are harder than others. And it's okay to be kinder to yourself on that hard day and say, like, today I'm going to take it easy. I'm going to go for a light walk. I'm not going to worry about sort of trying to do everything I feel like I have to do to get back to where I was.
Yeah.
And there'll be another day that's a good day, and a day where you can then explore more physical activity or making more of an attempt to eat better. But not every day is going to be the same. And I think if we beat ourselves up every single day and say, this is not going well, I'm not capable of this, I'm never going to feel at home in my body again, we then spiral into a very negative cycle again.
Right. And that sounds like a very healthy sentiment for really anything in general. You're going to have bad days, you're going to have good days, and you shouldn't be beating yourself up for not being able to do what you plan to do on that certain day. It's okay. And just kind of cutting yourself some slack and giving yourself some kindness. And so how can the partners and family members of people going through postpartum, how can they play an active role in creating a nurturing and inclusive environment for supporting postpartum well-being?
I mean, one of the things that keeps coming out of our research studies when we have conversations with new mothers is, in order to be well, in order to fit in physical activity or to attempt to eat well or do any sort of form of self-care, they need to feel like they're not at the center of household responsibilities. And the interesting thing about this is it's maintained its truth, even though a lot of women are now also working and will be going back to work, that when there is parental leave, and it's often the mother who takes that parental leave, you're caring for the infant, but because you're home and you're navigating the home environment, you also end up responsible for a lot of the household responsibility or the domestic responsibility. And so there isn't this equity at home that then affords being able to take the time to take care of yourself, because you feel like that's just one other thing on the to-do list that I can't get to. And so I think what, obviously above and beyond trying to create more equity and divide that household labor, just try to support your partner in making being healthy easier. So providing opportunity or time to engage in the way they think is appropriate that day. So not saying like, I gave you 30 minutes, go to the gym, but here's a 30-minute window. What could you do that would make you feel better after your challenges of your day? Or, actually have easy to reach, healthier food options in the house, so that when you're one-handed trying to get a baby to sleep and navigating things, you're not also thinking, what am I possibly going to grab that I can eat that's going to make me feel well? So just, those little pieces where maybe before you had kids, they were more romantic nuances that you thought of, make them about actually taking care of someone physically and emotionally.
Yeah, that sounds like it could make all the difference. And lastly, what advice would you give to new mothers with diverse bodies that would help them embrace and celebrate their postpartum journey?
I mean, I think it's a great question. Like, if you're thinking about, well, how do we, you hear some people really able to say and emphasize, like, my body just created a whole human. Like, this is incredible. This is a miracle. And, I should therefore just feel like everything is perfect and that I don't have any sort of a journey to go through to try to get back in touch with my body. And maybe that's true for some people, but we know identity shifts postpartum, that you go from your own worth to the worth of your child. And in addition to that, you've got the shift in the way you look, the way your body might feel. And I think the easiest way to sort of think about moving forward is to really recognize that life is just an ongoing journey. Like, you are in transition from, your first menstruation through pregnancy, postpartum, into perimenopause and menopause, and all the way through the aging process. And that's just like this ongoing physiological adaptation. And really, like, comparing your body to what it was like when you were 20 or pre-pregnancy, it sounds silly if you were 70 to say that, but we do it right after we've had a baby. And so,
Yeah, that is so true. You never really hear a 70-year-old woman go like, oh my gosh, my body when I was 30, I wish I had that. That makes a lot of sense.
yeah. And I just think, at those childbearing ages are also the times we just put the most pressure on ourselves. And whether that's relationships or parenting or career, you're kind of doing it all at once. And, it's okay that it's not perfect, that if you have 50% to give right now and you're giving 50%, that is enough. There is nothing else that you can give. And so if you don't feel like every single day you're fitting in, physical activity and eating well and, sleep if you're lucky to get it, that doesn't mean you're failing. Like, you're on a journey and every phase and transition is different.
Those are such words of wisdom, Iris. Thank you so much for sharing that, from your experience to what you think we could do as a society on a larger scale to what can be done individually. Now we're moving on to the practice and habits section. And my first question for you is, what is a habit you've practiced to support your well-being during postpartum?
So I like to use perception. So whenever I'm feeling a little bit like everything's out of control and not really going the way I want it to, or I'm not happy about things, I try to go through a bit of a perception talk with myself about what's real and what's perceived, and what are all of the things that are going really well, that are positive, and is this just, a phase that's a little bit more challenging? And I find I can kind of take myself out of some rumination or negative thought patterns if I can get out of that one thing that's creating that negative spiral. And so I try to do a little bit of that kind of gratitude, even just in my head, like, yeah, that's hard and I'm not happy about this, but these are the things that I have to be pretty thankful about.
And that sounds like a great practice for anyone with like depression or anxiety in general as well. But what are some of the challenges that you found to be particularly hard to overcome when you try during this practice?
I mean, body image will always be one of the most challenging obstacles for anyone. I'm an avid exerciser. I'm active every day. I will never be that tiny, really lean, fit body that people sort of perceive as being, an exercise professional or someone that you see as being, of that fitness narrative. And because we're all amenable to everything we see online and that comparison, of course, there's low moments, and there's moments where you try on everything in your closet and nothing really feels right or the way you want to appear. But I would say that those moments tend to be cyclical, that, you come in and out of them, not because anything's changed, not because your body weight changes 15 pounds every 2 days, but because, the way our mindset and our perception of ourselves shifts. And so sometimes you just got to ride it out. You got to be a little bit negative and be okay with, this isn't a day I'm feeling good, but not get so drawn in by that you feel helpless.
And how often do you usually practice this?
Oh, it depends probably on a number of things. I mean, there's so many hormonal changes that women go through. I just stopped nursing my toddler, and, there's things that shift that are also, not in your control, that make perception harder. And so I find there's, months that go by where things are going quite well. And maybe, with your kids too, they go through phases. And so you're finding, things at home are easier, and my children are bringing me more happiness this last month. And then, things go downhill a bit, and that's just life. I mean, if it didn't happen that way, it probably would be a little bit boring, that you always knew exactly what to expect.
For sure. And
but when it's good, enjoy the good.
for sure. And based on your experience, do you have any other recommendations of practices or habits to be combined with the one that you've just shared with us?
I mean, I'm going to give a vouch for movement. I'm not even going to call it physical activity. And I know that physical activity, exercise, whatever terminology you want to use, it's so fraught with assumptions that if you're saying, okay, well, you should go move your body more or be more active, that you're also saying you should go lose weight, or you should go do something that, feels like an add-on to what you have going on in your life. But inherently, movement, physical activity, it's so good for mental well-being. It's so good for giving you that identity and that direction, and, the health benefits, and so many things that extend well beyond aesthetics. And for the most part, research studies do not show that exercise leads to weight loss. So it's not even trying to vouch for weight loss, because that really comes from diet.
Yeah.
But if we can reimagine what this is and the benefit it has for the way we feel, then we'd realize it's like the biggest tool in the toolbox. But instead, we often feel like it's something we want to avoid because of the stigma around what it might represent.
Yeah, absolutely. Physical activity or movement for mental health. Movement for mental health. That's the tagline. Movement for mental health, not for weight loss. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't deliver weight loss. I mean, there's a reason you can be an avid exerciser and, a size 10, size 12. It's not a recipe for weight loss, but it is fitness and health.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Your personal stories and experiences. That was really eye-opening, and I learned so much. Now we're moving on to the open mic section, and this is your chance to talk about whatever it is that you're passionate about, and it doesn't have to be related to the topic. So the floor is yours. Take it away.
So this is where I'm going to be that, very typical academic mom. There's kind of, a couple of things I'm passionate about in my life, and it's my children, my family, and it really is physical activity and movement. So it's what I researched, but the reason I researched it, the reason I got into it when I was 18 in my undergrad all the way through my Ph.D. is because it's actually what I want to do. It's, every time I have a break from work or family demands, my choice is to go out into the forest and do my very slow trail running or hiking or biking. And I live in a beautiful area for access to, just forest very nearby. And I got out yesterday for an hour and a half of just slow jog, through the trails, and I didn't see another person through the trees the entire time. And it was just what I needed to recover, to reset. And it really is the thing I'm the most passionate about, is just having that opportunity to be out in nature and move.
That sounds so relaxing and so tranquil. And I must say your kids sound really fortunate. I am very curious to know, have you ever found anything on your runs, your trailer jogs? Is that what you called it?
Trail running. I
Trail
don't like to,
jogs?
I'm not really a runner. I'm a jogger.
Yeah,
So trail,
Do
I guess.
you ever find anything like mushrooms or like interesting things on your jogs in the forests?
See, what I haven't really mastered is being able to jog without looking at my feet, because I don't want to trip over a rock.
Yeah, fair.
Right. Typically like listening out for the potential of a bear. So I'm kind of like
Yeah.
all ears on, but more looking at my feet. I have ran into bears before, but they ran the other direction.
Well, that's fortunate. We are very glad to hear that. Or you wouldn't be here today. So very, very glad that the bear ran in the other direction. What would you do if the bear doesn't, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't faced that yet. I'm going with the whole
Oh,
black bears tend to go the other way.
right.
There's no grizzly.
Okay, well, yeah, that's fortunate. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. It's been such a pleasure talking to you and learning from you. If our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
So I do have research information listed under my faculty profile at the University of the Fraser Valley. If you or they search my name, I am a little bit on Twitter. I try to share my research and get the message out there for things that I think have an impact more broadly. So through my Twitter handle would be a great way to reach out as well. And always happy to just chat by email. You can always search that as.
All right, amazing. We'll link those in the show notes below. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you, Iris, once again for joining us, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
You've been listening to Raising Parents, the Parenting Science Insights podcast, produced by the Parenting Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it so that we can grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at pa.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Dina Sargent. Thanks for tuning in.